Welcome back to Watchman Review and the second part of this video series titled The Abrahamic God. This section is divided into two parts. Part 1 takes a look at the Abrahamic God himself, while Part 2 reviews each of the three Abrahamic offshoot religions individually. In the first video, The Evil Plan, we looked at evil today. Once I understood the evil plan, I decided to take a look at prophecy. To consider the Abrahamic God, we must look to the Bible, particularly the King James Version. The Abrahamic God forms the foundation of Judaism, being the Jews and Hebrews, Christianity, and some say Islam. To understand the Abrahamic God, we need to first ask, is he real? Does evidence exist to support the Bible? Perhaps if we could find the remains of Noah's Ark, we would know.
Researchers have learned that prior to 1960, in the heart of the mountains of Ararat, while on a routine military reconnaissance survey, Turkish Air Force Lieutenant A. Kurtz took an aerial photograph of a curious boat-shaped object. Subsequent review by Turkish photographic specialists confirmed the dimensions of this object to be virtually identical to those stated in the Old Testament as the length and roughly the width of the famous Diluvian vessel.
And here we are at last, gazing upon the mortal remains of the great boat that Noah and his family rode to safety.
When I arrived at the boat-shaped object, I was amazed at how much it looked like a boat. If you've ever seen a boat that had a hole in it and had partially sunk down to where just the railings of the boat were above the water, this is exactly what I saw sitting out there on that mountainside.
Located approximately 15 miles south of Mount Ararat, the site is located atop Doomsday Mountain. Its elevation? 6,375 feet above sea level. The dimensions are confirmed as approximately 515 feet in length, corresponding with the aerial photo survey and ground measurements made by the Turkish U.S. expedition. It appears a long boat-shaped semi-oval with a mound in the center. 20-foot earth-packed rims outline the immensity of the structure. It rests on sedimentary Cretaceous water-laid rock. This suggests that the entire valley was once immersed in water, an important criteria for establishing this area as the possible landing site of the Ark. He is directed to 4 massive anchor stones, each approximately 8 feet high and weighing several tons. Similar in proportion and design, the stones have 8 distinct crosses which experts believe represent the 8 survivors of the Great Flood. Each cross engraving seems to represent an individual survivor. Dragged as ballast behind the ships to which they were tethered, these anchor stones were commonplace on ships sailing the Mediterranean for millennia. Only in size do these stones differ from their Mediterranean counterparts. It is hypothesized that the colossal size of these stones indicates their use as an anchor on a ship of extreme proportions, perhaps even Ark-size proportion.
To essentially what would be 300 cubits long. Now that's a remarkable correspondence. It's not 500 cubits, it's not 150 cubits, it just happens to be 300 cubits long. And the biblical story just happens to record the length of the Ark as 300 cubits long.
Then, as though Wyatt's field successes were not enough to catapult the research into a whole new strata of discovery, a literally earth-shattering breakthrough takes place.
My disappointment at having to wait on a permit for a later date was offset by an earthquake that happened in 1978 that did a much better job of excavating the boat than I could have done in maybe a year or 2 years hard work. Simply dropped the earth away from the outside of the boat and left the rib timbers and other structures of the boat out there where you could see them. Also, there was a vertical split right down the center of the boat, which enabled me to measure the depth of the boat, plus get good, clean, fresh sample material out of there to have analyzed to tell us more about the chemical composition of the boat.
The samples are rushed back to the United States, where they are immediately analyzed. The results are electrifying. A high carbon content in the soil taken from where the boat's timbers are exposed provides evidence of long-decayed wood. Traces of metal are detected, revealing the possibility of objects such as metal supports. These are the first factual signs that the object is not simply a natural phenomenon, but may prove to be man-made.
He took a metal detector over, went over the formation, and first of all, he got positive readings on his metal detector, but it showed readings in patterns. And the results with all three different types of metal detectors were consistent, and they did indeed give a pattern as they laid out strips. Now they also got crosswise patterns, and this was first discovered with the metal detectors.
When we did this metal detector evaluation of the boat formation, we covered the sides of the boat also, the area that had been left bare when the earth fell away during the earthquake, and the rib timber patterns and the keel or keelson patterns were very obvious there along the sides also. Now, another thing we did with these metal detectors, where we spotted high concentrations, say of iron, for example, we were able to collect a sample of 91% pure iron that showed preferential gradients under microscopic examination. And in our language, that meant that this had been hand-worked.
Or perhaps the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not true, or embellished. Let's see.
These are the ashen cities, destroyed by the wrath of God. These cities were consumed by intense flames, a supernatural heat that was directed by the hand of God. Today there is ash that is of lighter color than the surrounding mountains and terrain. As mentioned in the Bible, this is a desolate area where nothing grows. Inspecting the formations closely, one can see structures containing man-made elements, such as 90-degree angles. Even though the buildings were consumed by the fire, the remaining ash in these cities is comprised of a heavier material due to the inclusion of brimstone or sulfur, and still retains some of the original shapes of man-made structures. This stunning structure stands out as a singular formation with 4 sides, surrounded by a deep moat. Here we can see square windows that are visible in the walls of the structures, which give us a view of the past.
Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it. After it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then of course smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur, and there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here.
This brimstone is made of monoclinic, white sulfur that has been burned or cooked at a high temperature. It is quite different from natural sulfur that is formed in geothermal areas. Samples were taken to a lab for analysis. Each sample was individually transported into the testing chamber for analysis. The results proved to be quite amazing. as the samples were found to be 98% pure sulfur, unlike any other sulfur found on Earth. This pure, cooked sulfur is the heavenly marker that was left behind to show the world that the Lord, without a doubt, destroyed these sinful cities at His command. Critics have said that the sulfur is from volcanic activity, but that type of rhombic sulfur is only 40% sulfur and is of a crystalline form, unlike the white, compacted monoclinic form that is found in the Ashen cities today.
And what about the story of Moses and the Exodus? If we could find evidence, would that prove the Bible to be true?
Weba al-Muzayina, which means, it means the waters of Moses opening. This is amazing. And the exact spot where the crossing took place, we have the site confirmed by maps, because that's the crossing route. This is Nuweiba, Egypt. This is the Gulf of Aqaba, and this is the side of Saudi Arabia, as you can see on a map. And you can keep going on with the pictures, the view at Red Sea, but what I want to really focus your attention to as well is the chariot wheels that were found in the sea at Nuweiba. Is that a coincidence? They even took pictures and found actual chariot wheels, above chariot wheels fixed to axles, standing at attention on this seabed. You can see them right here. You can see one right here as well, and another right there. Above left, photo taken of a gilded chariot wheel that remains on the seafloor. It was found by Ron Wyatt using a molecular frequency generated from his boat above after he set the equipment to search for gold. The Bible said all the chariots of Egypt and 600 choice chariots of gold veneered models were in the army pursuing Yahuwah Elohim's people. It is speculated there were 20,000 chariots destroyed that day. Above right is a drawing of a 4-spoke chariot found in an Egyptian tomb from the same time period. 4, 6, and 8 spoke wheels are found here in the Gulf and were only used at the same time during the 13th dynasty, or 1446 BC, when the Exodus took place. But do they want you to know that? Why are they hiding this from you should be the question. Why don't they want you to know this? There were numerous chariot wheels plus human and horse bones at the crossing site. Above on right is a human femur bone that is covered by coral and was tested at Stockholm University. It is from the right leg of a man 365 to 170 centimeters tall. It is basically mineralized by resting in the Red Sea for 3,500 years. And we see more coral covering chariot wheels on a vertical axle that is buried in the sand. Although this is a typical, Bill Fry found this within 10 minutes of searching at Nuweiba. So case in point, you can find these chariot wheels in Nuweiba, Egypt.
And how about Mount Sinai? Did Moses truly take the Jews into Saudi Arabia after the Exodus?
To look at it, it was written by Sir Richard Burton in the 1800s. He was an explorer of vast amounts of the former Ottoman Empire, including Arabia. And he had drawn a map in the back, and as we pulled that map out, that map had a beautiful rendition of the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, Sinai Peninsula, but it also had just a little portion of this northwestern quadrant of Arabia, and it listed that land as Madyan. He's saying Midian's over there, and if you can find Midian, you can find the region where Mount Sinai was, because that's where Moses was supposedly tending the flocks of Jethro.
Well, we found another book in the bookstore called The Mountain of God. This was by Emmanuel Anati. He also mentions Jebel al-Lawz as being a potential site.
The Caldwells pack up and head for Saudi Arabia and begin to search for the highest mountain in Midian. Though free to travel through Saudi Arabia on work visas, no permission has been granted to enter the government-imposed forbidden zone around Jebel al-Lawz. The altar with petroglyphs is their first discovery.
We came around the front side of that and didn't really see anything, but as you go around to the back side, the cows started becoming very visible.
My daughter was there and she says, "Dad,
there's 12 cows."
Okay, good.
The top of Sinai is very black, darkened rock. It has a appearance of, in some light, coal.
It's extremely interesting because the closer you get up toward the blackened peak, you can see where the red granite folds down and the black begins, and it's a dividing line that is like night and day.
In some light, it actually has a blue tinge to it. And one of the verses in Scripture talks about the top of the mountain as if it were a sapphire stone.
From high atop the mountain, Jim and Penny see the V-shaped altar of sacrifice.
The altar of sacrifice is what inspired us to continue to go back to the mountain. This is where the pillars are. And
what are they doing there? These huge stone pillars. Again, civilization would have been required to construct these.
It says in chapter 24 of Exodus that Moses got up early, he erected 12 pillars, he built an altar there at the base of the mountain, and then he brings oxen in for sacrifice.
Recent excavations show evidence of ancient ash deep in the soil at this site.
The 12 pillars were signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. What would we have for pillars? We found these white stone pillars, about 22, 24 inches in diameter. They're kind of a white, soft, marble-ish type material. They would have stacked right on top of one another.
Jim Caldwell is able to explore the cave that Bob and Larry could only see from a distance.
It is dead front of the mountain. It was a lot higher than I thought it was. The entrance looks small. It's 15 feet high. It's a big cave. I was able to climb into it. It's about 20 feet deep. There is a place for somebody to bed down in the back of it. One of the things I did is when I was walking to the back of it, I swung around with my video camera, and the view was awe-inspiring.
The Caldwells also find numerous almond trees around the mountain, significant because of how they lend credibility to the account of Aaron's rod made of almond wood, which budded and produced ripe almonds, according to Numbers 17:8. Additionally, quail can be seen all over the area. Exodus 16:13 records that in the evening, quail covered the camp of the Israelites. Jim and Penny also find grinding stones, spear points, and other sorts of weapons, all fashioned in the Egyptian style, which the Israelites would have learned during their 400 years of slavery in Egypt. But the most compelling of their discoveries is also the most mysterious.
I think the greatest find around this mountain was the split rock discovery. We had nothing to do with the split rock discovery. It was brought to our attention by the Caldwell family. This, to me, is the real nail in this whole thing that drives it home that this is the real Mount Sinai.
In that valley, there are numerous natural outcroppings of hills that are just comprised of boulders. And then there is this one with this massive rock sitting atop of it.
From a distance, it's big. When you're close to it, it is enormous. It's 4 stories tall.
The Exodus account says that the people of Israel grumbled against Moses, saying, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?"
They would have cried out for water. And of course, Moses heard their cries, petitioned God. Moses struck the rock, and it split right down the middle from top to bottom. The Bible literally says the water gushed from this.
I climbed up the backside to the very base of this rock, and right at the base of that split, it's deeply gouged, and the rock on either side, if you look straight up from the inside of that rock, it's really, really smooth, but it's pressure flaked. Big chunks of granite have been flaked from the bottom. And it's not a normal erosive pattern for granite. Granite generally from just wind and erosion will crack and flake off from the top down. This is coming up as though something came flying up and really gouged the rock. When that rock was split in two, a geyser erupted out of the top of it. It blew those two pieces of that rock apart.
It's very interesting. This part of the world gets a ½ inch of rain every 10 years. It's so arid and so dry. Yet this rock shows distinct evidence of water erosion, not just a trickle, a burst of water flowing from it, washing out the whole mountainside, going down and washing all the sand that's down below it, creating an ancient lake bed down below.
How do we know that the Bible has not been altered over time, that the stories are true or original?
What would you say would be the most significant discovery in, let's say, the past century? It's got to be the Dead Sea Scrolls. But what makes that discovery so important?
You know, it is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Qumran changed our understanding. It was like getting into a time machine and going back 1,000 years. The earliest manuscript we had was about 1000 AD. Suddenly they had manuscripts from the time of Jesus, in fact, to the 2nd century before the time of Jesus. And critical scholars said, well, when they get if we knew what was back then, we'd see how much the Bible changed. We went back and we saw how much the Bible stayed the same.
But if evolution were true, would that prove that the Bible is incorrect? Or should we actually believe what scientists tell us?
How old is the Earth? Evolutionists claim it's 4.6 billion years old. But what does the evidence say? Let's take a look.
There are numerous scientific ways to show the universe is not billions of years old. In 2011, the world's population reached 7 billion people. In 1985, there were 5 billion people on planet Earth. And in 1800, there were only 1 billion people on the planet. Most people agree that there were only about 1 billion people around 1800. The world's population at the time of Christ was about 250 million people. Starting from the Bible, we see that 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood in which only 8 people survived. And this is exactly what the evidence shows. The current population shows only 4,400 years of growth. God's Word is truth. Let's talk about supernova rings. When a star blows up, it creates a nova or a supernova. Astronomers have observed that about every 30 years a star dies and explodes into a supernova. There are only about 300 supernovas. Let's see, 300 times 30 equals about 9,000 years. Well, if the universe is billions of years old, how come there are less than 300 supernovas? There should be several hundred million of them. This is evidence that shows that the universe is only thousands of years old, not billions. Textbooks say red giant stars evolve into white dwarfs stars over billions of years. They teach that it takes billions of years for a star to evolve from a red giant to a white dwarf. Well, we know this is not true. Egyptian hieroglyphs from 2000 BC describe Sirius as red. It was observed to be red as recently as 150 AD. Today, it is a white star binary. So no, it does not take billions of years for this to happen. It only takes thousands. Jupiter is cooling off, and therefore cannot be billions of years old. If it were billions of years old, it would have cooled off by now. Here we have the moon. The moon goes around the Earth. I think we can all agree about this. As the moon goes around the Earth, it is gradually getting farther away. We are slowly losing the moon. It's leaving us a couple of inches per year. Not a big deal. But if the moon is getting farther and farther away every day, that means that it used to be closer. Well, if we bring the moon in closer, we start to create a problem because the moon is what causes the tides. If the moon were closer, the tides would be higher. There's a law called the inverse square law. If you brought the moon to 1/3 the distance, you flip the 1/3 and square it, you get 9 times the gravitational pull. If you were to do all the math on this, you will find out that the moon and the Earth would have been almost together just over 1 billion years ago. Walt Brown, in his book In the Beginning, says that this fact alone puts the age of the Earth-Moon system at less than 1.2 billion years max. Short period comets are losing material and have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. If the universe is billions of years old, why do we still see comets? They should all be gone by now. Magnets lose their strength with time. The Earth's magnetic strength has declined 10% in the last 150 years and 40% in the last 1,000 years. Since it is getting weaker, that means that it used to be stronger, and it cannot be more than 25,000 years old. The Earth's magnetic field alone limits the Earth to being less than 25,000 years old. This also means that carbon dating cannot work for more than a few thousand years. The Sahara Desert has a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same direction. This causes the desert to grow. The process is called desertification. They did an in-depth study of the Sahara Desert and came to the conclusion that the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. So the desert started growing about 4,000 years ago. If the Earth is millions of years old, why is there not a bigger desert somewhere? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old? Well, let's start from the Bible and see if we can figure this thing out. The Bible says that 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. It's pretty hard to have a desert under a worldwide flood. So I predict that the oldest desert should be less than 4,400 years old. And it is. Again, God's word is truth. Sometimes when they drill into the ground, they hit oil. And these oil wells can have up to 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. That is a lot of pressure. 20,000 psi. The people that have studied this have concluded that the rock can only hold that pressure for about 10,000 years or less. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. So now I have two questions. Where did the oil come from, and why is it still under pressure? Most scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are changed by heat and pressure, turning them into oil, and it does not take millions of years to make oil. In 1971, they learned how to make oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory. In 1996, a proposal was approved in Western Australia that would build a plant to create oil from sewage sludge in just 30 minutes. There's a place in Texas that has turned turkey guts and other waste into oil. They said, we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. The Sinclair Gas and Oil Company uses the dinosaur as their logo. They say dinosaurs turned into oil. Mellowed for 80 million years. I don't think so. Again, let's start with the Bible and see what really happened. 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. During that flood, lots of animals and people drowned. They got buried by the gravel, rocks, and mud and sand, which got pretty heavy after a while, and eventually they were squished into oil. So the oil that is down there today is from the people and animals that drowned and got buried in the flood of Noah's day. Wood petrifies quickly. Here's some petrified firewood. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. It does not take millions of years to give birth. Here's a petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. Here is a picture of the oldest tree on the planet. It is called the bristlecone pine. Now, tree ring dating is not an exact science. Trees often produce more than one ring each year. But this textbook says the oldest tree in the world is 4,300 years old. Now that is a pretty old tree. However, I have a question. If the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why is the oldest tree 4,300 years old? Here is a picture of a coral reef. The largest coral reef in the world is off the coast of Australia and is called the Great Barrier Reef. Some of the reef was destroyed during World War II by warships and things like that. Afterwards, some environmentalists studied the reef to see how fast it grows back. They watched it grow for 20 years. After watching it grow for 20 years, they came to the conclusion that the reef is less than 4,200 years old. If the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? And why is the oldest coral reef less than 4,200 years old? When it rains, 30% of the water runs into the ocean, bringing with it mineral salts. The oceans are getting saltier every day. Today, they are 3.6% salt. They could have gone from fresh water to 3.6% salt in less than 5,000 years. If the Earth were millions or billions of years old, the oceans would be much more saltier. If you have ever been in a cave, the guide always says, don't touch the formations because they take millions of years to form. They say this formation in New Mexico started 250 million years ago. I don't think so. Some say that the fastest they can grow are 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. Again, I don't think so. Here are some 50-inch stalactites growing under the Lincoln Memorial that was built in 1922. The photo was taken in the 1960s, so this happened in only about 40 years. It didn't take millions of years. Here's a bat covered with flowstone before it could even rot. Here's a picture of a guy in a building in Indiana that has huge cave formations in the basement from where the water had been leaking through the limestone. The picture was taken only 40 years after the building was built. Here's a picture from a mine in Australia. The mine was closed for 55 years, and when they went back in, there were these huge cave formations inside that only took 55 years to form. Again, it did not take millions of years for these things to happen. Did you know that at the current rate of erosion, the continents would erode flat in 14 million years? Obviously, the continents have not eroded flat, so the Earth cannot be millions of years old. Erosion features all over the Earth show there was much greater erosion in the past, probably from Noah's flood. The whole world was destroyed by Noah's flood. Here we have the Grand Canyon. This textbook says over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. This textbook says the Colorado River has cut through layer upon layer of rock over millions of years. I don't think so. If a dam were built across Grand Canyon, a large lake would form. In fact, right after the flood of Noah's day, there used to be two huge lakes there, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. The lakes are long gone, but the beaches are still there. You can still see the beach line. They got too full, went over the top, and washed out that canyon relatively quickly. That canyon is a washed out spillway. So no, it did not take millions of years for the Grand Canyon to form. It formed quickly, just after the flood.
It all started 4,400 years ago, right when the Bible says the flood occurred. Why? Because the earth is young, not old.
Here, and take on a topic that is sure to be very controversial with many of you. In school, we are all taught the heliocentric model of our solar system. The heliocentric model is the one that we are all familiar with, where the sun is in the center of our solar system and all of the planets orbit around it. However, what you probably did not know is that mathematically speaking, the geocentric model is every bit as viable.
So is everything we know wrong?
Well, if the Copernican principle is wrong, then yes. Because as Bob said, everything is interpreted through that epistemological grid. And if that foundational assumption is wrong, then yes, our picture of the universe is fundamentally wrong. Now, the scientists will argue back and forth about this. They are very invested in a very successful model. But that model has a lot of patches in it. Dark matter, dark energy, you know, these things have not been observationally confirmed. They believe they must be there because their formulas have gotten them so far, and so they'll plug in these other entities to make the equations work. But there is a strong and growing, very credible group of scientists who are beginning to question the Copernican principle. For example, we all learned about dark energy. Dark energy is causing the universe to accelerate its expansion. Well, George Ellis and a group that he works with, that we talk about in the film with, they said, wait a minute, let's just play with this for a second. Let's look at the world through a different view. Let's put Earth near the center, and let's get rid of the Copernican principle. Can we explain everything we see without dark energy? And the answer is yes, you can. And you will see many papers now in the peer-reviewed journals. They call it void cosmology. And the idea is that we're at the center of a void, and if we assume that the Earth is in that special non-Copernican position, we don't need dark energy to explain these observations. And that's big. That's big, because nobody has a clue what dark energy is.
Well, that's one of the things, Bob, isn't it? That it seems to me that, okay, so there's a big riddle here that, at least from the purely scientific point of view, there's this big riddle, and the riddle is, you know, how does the universe work? Okay, at some point, you know, you throw out a guess about some aspect of it, and then to support that guess, you have to come up with 3 more guesses, and to support those 3, they each spin off 10 more. Well, at what point do you get called on the fact, hey guys, every time you come up with one of these further guesses, you're further removed from anything observable.
Yeah.
But, you know, it makes it on the cover of Time magazine, and the average Joe goes, ooh, dark matter. They have the slightest idea what that means. The guys hypothesizing it barely know what it means. So
here's another objection. If everything is moving, in other words, all the stars in the universe are moving, How could we possibly determine if we are the center of this moving universe?
Over the past decade or so, we have seen out to the very limits of the observable cosmos. We've mapped its largest structure, the cosmic microwave background, the oldest light in the universe according to the standard Big Bang model of cosmology. What we have discovered is shocking.
On the very largest scales, we see a pattern of really big hot and cold spots which line up around a special axis, which has been dubbed the axis of evil. And it's quite puzzling. Why is there a special direction in space?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you asked that, because in 2009 they sent up a probe called the Planck probe. It just came back with the results in 2013 in March. I don't know if you heard about it or not.
No.
The European Space Agency set it up in cooperation with NASA. This was the third attempt that they had to nullify the data that they were finding in the cosmic microwave background radiation that permeates the whole universe, that the Earth was in the center of the universe. The first one they sent up was in 1990 called the COBE probe. It came back, showed the Earth was in the center. The WMAP was the second one in 2001, came back with the same data. And what they tried to do was say that this was all an error. It was some kind of misreading, or it was there was contamination in the apparatus or the sky or whatever. So they sent up a third probe in 2009, just came back in 2013. Guess what? Same exact results. Same exact results. And what were the interpretations? Well, the Earth has to be in the center of the universe. And we have somebody quoted in our book, Lawrence Krauss of the Arizona State University, who says, yeah, this means we're in the center of the universe.
Let's pick up on that point a bit. You mentioned that the background radiation, microwave radiation in the universe, supplied data from which it became apparent that the Earth was in fact at the center of a moving universe. Explain why that is so. Why do these data confirm that?
Okay. Well, the Big Bang Theory predicts that there was an explosion 13.7 billion years ago, okay? So if there was an explosion, then that means the explosion had to come out equal on all sides of the sphere. It had to be what they call homogeneous, okay? And that's naturally accepted. It's like homogenized milk.
Sure.
You know, you shake that thing up and you can't see one place from another place. It's all homogenized. And that's what they needed for this Big Bang universe. What they found when they sent these three probes up, yeah, some of it was homogeneous, but it's like having a bowl full of Jell-O with two swords going through the middle of the Jell-O.
What are the swords?
The swords are the orientation of the cosmic microwave background radiation throughout the universe.
What do you mean by the orientation?
Okay, there's hot and cold spots they found. It's not homogeneous. There's hot and cold spots in this microwave background radiation, and if you align all these cold spots, it forms an X through the whole universe.
Unbelievable.
And guess what's in the middle?
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
This is what the data show.
This is what the data show.
But if dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, would that prove the Bible wrong? Or did they lie to us about that too?
Dinosaur means terrible lizard, and dinosaurs lived with humans all through history. They just had a different name for them. But dinosaur bones and human bones have been found together. Dinosaur bones were found in the same rock strata as these fossilized human hands. Dinosaur bones and mammal bones found together. Here's one of the Ica stones showing a human riding a dinosaur. Dr. Ball has a couple of the stones in his museum. We have 8 in our museum now of these Ica stones. I think we have the largest collection in America of these Ica stones from Peru. Many of them show dinosaurs on there. Dinosaur footprints and human footprints have been found together in Glen Rose, Texas. I know there's controversy about this. I've been there 5 times. I've heard all the critics on it, and I've been there myself to check it out, okay? But go to Dallas, Texas, and go south 45 miles to Glen Rose, and you'll find the Paluxy River flows through this little town, and it's all full of limestone. The whole area is limestone, kind of like around here in Knoxville. Well, that river cuts through this limestone layers. In 1908, there was a flood. The river dropped 17 feet per mile. But this flood was incredible. It was, I think, 30 feet above flood stage or something. It was just an incredible flood in 1908. It ripped off the bottom of the river, tore off the layer of limestone. 2 foot of limestone was ripped up. Underneath was a new layer of limestone, and when the river dried up that next summer, they discovered there are hundreds of dinosaur footprints. Dinosaur footprints. It's called Dinosaur Valley State Park. They chiseled out lots of the footprints and took them to museums to save them so they wouldn't get eroded by the river. Took out huge blocks in the 1930s and set them up under dinosaur skeletons. Footprints are big. Here's a little kid taking a bath in one. But sometimes in this area they find human footprints with the dinosaur footprints. human tracks and dinosaur tracks together. Here's a trail of human tracks and crossing a trail of dinosaur tracks. And the human footprints, some of them are pretty good size, and occasionally they're found inside the dinosaur footprint. Well, if you're running through the mud to escape the flood, that's the logical place to step, right where somebody else already stepped. True. Also, they found a hammer, a fossilized human hammer, a man-made hammer. People say they didn't have any iron before the flood. Oh, sure they did. The Bible says Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass and iron. This bell found inside a lump of coal. They knew about iron and metals before the flood came. They were extremely smart. You kids will be taught in school that the geologic column represents the history of the earth and that the Carboniferous era is when coal formed. That's baloney. Coal formed at the time of the flood because that world was buried. They found a gold chain inside a lump of coal back in 1881 in Illinois. This iron pot found inside a lump of coal. This thing found inside solid rock, supposed to be 600 million years old. Here I am in Nampa, Idaho, holding what's called the Nampa image. A well driller found this little doll 320 feet down while he's drilling a well, probably a pre-flood doll. Advanced stone tools were found in a gold mine in California. They're digging in the middle of this mountain, digging a shaft back into a gravel pit under layers of lava supposed to be 55 million years old, and they find human tools in there. Professor Holmes of the Smithsonian was one of the most vocal critics of the California finds. He said, perhaps if Professor Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony. Is he saying he shouldn't have announced this finding because it goes against the theory? Is that what he's saying? That's exactly what he's saying. And folks, I'm telling you, there are people that are so dedicated to that stupid evolution theory that they will block out from their mind and from print, if they can, anything that goes against it. They defend the theory with religious fervor. Smithsonian is very responsible for doing a lot of this stuff of hiding evidence against evolution.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was. And it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened? Yes. That's the dinosaur bone? Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid...
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel. You see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time.
This concludes our second video in this series titled Abrahamic God Part 1. Stay tuned for Abrahamic God Part 2, where we take a closer look at each of the 3 Abrahamic offshoot religions individually. As always, you can find these and other related videos in full on our website at www.watchmanreview.com. Thank you for watching.